Hi, I'm Dr. Gregg Townsley, and welcome to another segment on Dr. Gregg Talks Story. We have been looking at various different aspects of the pandemic, the coronavirus, its origins, the handling of the pandemic, and Event 201 and so forth. Today I'd like to start out just by bringing you some of the latest news, and that is that Bill Gates has admitted that the Omicron variant is doing a better job of producing immunity, natural immunity, strong natural immunity, than the vaccines are, and that it has, quote, gotten out to the world faster than the vaccines. It's very telling that his quote would be, sadly, Omicron is a type of vaccine getting out to the world faster. Billionaire Bill Gates admitted that the Omicron variant has created a high level of natural immunity and has moved out into the world faster than the vaccines. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, the Microsoft co-founder was asked to assess where the world is today regarding the pandemic in light of vaccines. He lamented that the world had failed to distribute the vaccines fast enough, allowing for the virus to mutate into a form that has infected many people as the hospitalization rates decline all over the world. Yes, folks, it's true. Omicron is probably the best thing that has happened in the last 2.5 years. Without a doubt, Omicron is producing herd immunity across the planet. In places like Africa, where the actual vaccination rates have been very low, they have done serology tests that have shown that 80% of the people have either been vaccinated or infected with one of the variants, and that they have strong natural immunity. In Bill Gates' statement, he acknowledged that Omicron produces and creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and that it's done a better job. He laments that the vaccines are sitting on the shelf, and as I stated the last time, we have a problem where governments and big pharma and the big tech companies and big corporations, which all signed on to Event 201, a planning exercise for a global pandemic held in October of 2019, 3 months before the official kickoff of the pandemic or release of the virus. Whether that was purposeful or whether that was by accident, I can't say for sure. But anyway, what we have at this point is we have what appears to me to be answer to prayer. We have a variant that has come up that has 53 different individual separate mutations and actually produces strong immunity both to the Omicron variant, the Delta variant, the Beta variant, and the original virus. So getting Omicron is probably the best thing that could happen to you, unless you are very, very old, like over 75 perhaps, and having comorbidities, or if you are grossly obese and have diabetes that is not under control. So Omicron is producing herd immunity and showing that the vaccine is really not needed for anyone, and this is a statement not by me, this is a statement made by many, many MDs across the world, including all of the frontline doctors and those who signed the Great Barrington Declaration, over 900,000 research scientists, epidemiologists, virologists, vaccinologists, all stating basically that the way the pandemic was handled was very poorly and had a great negative effect on society. So I'm going to talk about the handling of the pandemic, Event 201, and why in the world is it that we're taking medical advice from a man with absolutely no medical background, who has promoted vaccines and actually been sued multiple times for the damage that these vaccines have done in various countries around the world. And if you're familiar with his vaccine programs in Africa and other nations, which I encourage you to do some research on, you will find out that a lot of people were hurt by Bill Gates's vaccines. So let's talk a little bit more about the handling of the pandemic. There was an event called Event 201, which took place at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. It was the medical school at Johns Hopkins University. This was in October of 2019, 3 months prior to when most of us became aware that there was an epidemic that became then a pandemic. At that time, they had already spent 2 years of bringing people together and organizing people from industry, from big tech, from social media, from every aspect really of society that has much influence upon policies and how people think. Governments and world governance through the World Economic Forum. And at this event, they were staging basically what would we do if there happened to be a worldwide pandemic from a respiratory coronavirus. Now again, this was 3 months prior to when the pandemic started from the aspect of what we knew here in the United States. This was October 19th of 2019, Event 201. And in this preparation, in this huge, very well organized planning session, there were representatives from throughout the different countries, health organizations, representatives from the media, from big tech, and they were forming exactly what they would do in response to a worldwide pandemic with a respiratory coronavirus that had not yet happened. Now, in addition to that, they were putting into place various things that they decided upon in advance that had nothing to do with the science that would come out once we found out more about the virus. And they were going against what a lot of epidemiologists and virologists were giving input to in various different ways of disaster preparedness and looking at what to do as far as future epidemics. So in Event 201, they came up with basically a narrative that sidelined early treatment options. They came up with advanced planning for controlling the narrative concerning the virus, the pandemic itself, and every aspect of it. They also came up with a plan to discredit scientists and doctors and anyone else who would go against their pre-planned narrative that was happening prior to any of the scientific evidence that would come out. They were also planning to discredit repurposed medications that have, in the hands of many, many, many doctors all over the planet, proven to be safe and effective in treating this disease. This is a treatable disease. And they had designed ahead of time that the only way to treat this or to deal with this pandemic would be through vaccines. You might wonder, why in the world would that be? Well, let me tell you that in this planning from Event 201, the number of places where money is mentioned is very front and center. Governments should provide more resources and support for the development and surge manufacturing of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics that will be needed during a severe pandemic. Countries should support this effort through the provision of additional funding. There are some that are likely to need emergency and international financial support as well. The World Bank, the International Money Fund, regional development banks, national governments, foundations, and others should explore ways to increase the amount and availability of funds in a pandemic and ensure that they will be flexibly used where needed. Used where needed is a euphemism for many, many, many people becoming very, very, very rich. And as the information and investigations into this pandemic take place over the next couple of years, we're going to end up seeing who it is that became extremely wealthy as a result of this Event 201 and how they would handle every aspect of the pandemic prior to it ever even happening. So it was at this Event 201 that Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum executed a scheme to control all the responses and information prior to the scientific studies. And you might ask, what is the reason for this massive rush to preparedness for pandemics and epidemics? Well, the truth of the matter is that we're having a huge number of problems with genetically engineered organisms, something that has been talked about in the past on the front of, I can remember the front of Time magazine, the front of even way back, Look magazine and various others talking about bioethics and the dangers of some of the scientific discoveries and what would be done with them, how they might be overseen, whether they had adequate oversight or not. And of course, what we've seen so far are a couple of things. We have seen in the previous episodes that they were playing with bat coronaviruses in the laboratory between 2004 and 2014 here in this country. And as of 2012 and 2013, they had a horseshoe bat coronavirus that would attach to the ACE2 receptor on human cells 99.9% of the time. That was 2012 and 2013. We saw that they were playing with these SARS-like coronaviruses that use the ACE2 receptor, and that scientists were not only aware of this, that there were many scientists, including Dr. Zheng Li from the Wuhan Institute, who were actively doing this here in the United States. This is not just a problem that somehow China got involved with. We showed that this research had many near misses at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with their high security lab with coronaviruses escaping. They had numerous different incidences. So folks, the bottom line is that they have been playing with bat coronaviruses for a long, long time. Here's another one, SARS-like cluster of circulating bat coronaviruses shows potential for human emergence. Dr. Zheng Li's name right on the front. And this was being done in our country. And a lot of this research had to do with producing a chimera. A chimera is when they take two different viruses and they mix them together, producing a completely different organism, something that's not natural. This is not a natural coronavirus. This is a coronavirus that has had gain-of-function research done to it, and then they increased the morbidity and the mortality. That's what gain-of-function does. It takes an already pathogenic virus and it makes it more virulent, easier to spread, and more damaging to whoever gets it. And that's what they were doing in our laboratories. And it was defunded under Health and Human Services, which is over the National Institutes of Health, which is over Fauci's organization, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. Fauci got defunded in 2015. He was not happy about it. He made sure that this research, this gain-of-function research, and all that had happened got shifted to the Wuhan lab. And Dr. Zhang Li took over, and he made sure that she got that U.S. taxpayers' money, $3.7 million, through the EcoHealth Alliance, was transferred to the Chinese government, to this laboratory in Wuhan. So when you listen to politicians blaming China, we have as much complicity in this. Dr. Fauci, his hands are absolutely dirty with this. And he has positioned himself to cover his you-know-what. I read last time how many different times over the last years they've had laboratory breaks on various different viruses. Let me just read a little bit to you again. The 2016 safety breach at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill High Containment Laboratory is one of several near-miss incidents at the university in recent years involving multiple types of genetically engineered coronaviruses, the records show. Again, genetically engineered coronaviruses. The university has declined to publicly disclose key details about the incidents, including the names of the viruses involved, the nature of the modifications made to them, and what risks were posed to the public, contrary to the National Institute of Health guidelines. They broke the law. The university notified the proper oversight agencies about the incidents and took corrective action as needed, is all that the University of North Carolina would say in an official statement. Again, they are by law required to not only name the genomic sequence of the virus and the name of the virus, they are required by law to tell every single thing that they did to that virus to genetically change it, and they refused to do that. They refused their oversight. And this is the nature of the safety breaches at UNC are particularly important now as the origins of COVID-19, which has killed, at the time of this writing, 775,000 people worldwide, infected 21.7 million others, continue to elude public health officials. The only reason it's eluding anyone is because they are refusing to look behind the curtain and deal with what they all know has been going on for a long, long time. There are people who are becoming filthy rich on these studies. There are scientists who are being paid off, and many of those payments coming from the Chinese government to research institutions in our country. Credible scientists have been concerned for years about the potential for a lab accident to cause a pandemic. Richard Ebright, a molecular biologist at Rutgers University who has testified before Congress on lab safety issues, said the series of incidents with coronaviruses at University of North Carolina gives fuel to the possibility that this pandemic, or one in the future, could originate as a lab accident. So why is it that they are going through all of these different things that they're coming up with? Event 201 was the first one put in place actually before the pandemic started, basically saying exactly how everything would be handled. And again, not in step with the subsequent science that was found out during the pandemic. As researchers around the world, there's been more research done on this disease than any other disease in the history of the world. More than rabies, more than any other disease, more than smallpox. They are coming up with improved recommendations for America's readiness for the next pandemic, for instance, an entire list. And very clearly in these lists, they want to develop a national strategy to battle misinformation and disinformation during infectious disease outbreaks. Well, what that means is they want to be able to control the narrative so that only vaccines are considered as a part of how to respond to this. Every doctor who has any kind of insight into this virus will tell you that this virus is treatable at an early stage, and it can be treated successfully. Look at how successfully President Trump was treated. A 77-year-old man who is obese was at the hospital at Bethesda, where they take presidents who become ill, the highest level of medical care in the country, and he had a really bad form, a bad variant, and he was out of the hospital in no time. He didn't even stop working the whole time he was in there. So do a little thinking and realize that there is an ongoing formation of various different things that are being done in order to respond to future viral outbreaks. And these things are being done under the auspices of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, with funding from the Bill Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, Mr. Vaccine, and the World Economic Forum. And it's important for you to understand that money is what is buying influence on how things are being decided around the world. The World Economic Forum is not a medical group. It is a globalist group that is trying to leverage the pandemic towards a cashless society by making the central banks of the entire world move towards this digital economy in which they will be able to trace and tax every transaction that you have. You will have no freedom in how you spend your money or where you spend your money. They will be able to tell every single transaction that you have. They will be able to freeze your bank accounts if they want to. And this is the future of a cashless society. Very frightening. But just watch what happened in Canada when there was a protest. Even after the trucks were removed from the Ambassador Bridge going from the United States to Canada, from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, over to Detroit, Michigan, it was no longer something that was stopping commerce. And yet when they had the protest in Ottawa, anyone who even contributed money to the protest, they were threatened with and actively gone after to have their bank accounts frozen and even their cryptocurrency trading platforms sequestered. This is the kind of government overreach and communistic type of activity that is taking place in our modern world through big tech, big government, and agendas that are coming from the World Economic Forum. The globalists from Davos are making their move. I'm going to say that again. The globalists from Davos and the World Economic Forum are planning what is called the Great Reset. They have already instituted what is called Agenda 2030, following what was already put in place called Agenda 21. They had over 150 countries sign on to this in the year 2015 under the Obama administration. This gives groups that are called governance, not governments, but governance, something you have no control over, you have no vote on, increasing amounts of power from this World Economic Forum in order for the globalists to be able to take positions of prominence and actually leverage and control governments around the world. So I am unveiling the facts behind this, the evidence for what is actually going on in this pandemic. You might have noticed that there were a lot of things that didn't make sense. You might have noticed that Anthony Fauci's emails showed that he was lying repeatedly. You might ask, well, why is that? It's because ahead of time they already had Event 201 all planned out on exactly how they were going to respond, and they had big tech, big corporations, big business, governments, etc., all coming under their influence. Again, a governance type of committee that's supposedly altruistically out to help the world. And yet, even now, they have to admit that they have done great damage to the middle class. They have decimated many, many businesses. They have caused a huge increase in suicides and mental health issues. They have damaged children's learning abilities because they can't see mouths move when people have their masks on. They can't learn language without watching someone talk as they listen. All of this developmental stuff with children is not going to even come out for another few years. But we're going to see how far behind these kids are who are supposedly being kept safe from a virus that doesn't, at that time, the variants didn't even infect children. And when they did get infected, it was less serious than influenza. Omicron was so mild that they had to have multiple articles in the news about how to tell the difference between Omicron and the common cold. Perhaps you remember those just a few months ago. Many, 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 many articles everywhere you looked. How to tell Omicron from the common cold. Because they wanted you to go in and get a test so that they could put on TV that there were cases so that they could sell more vaccine, because they've got vaccine sitting on the shelf. They are trying to clear inventory. There is corruption and money behind this. And Big Pharma, along with big tech and big government, they are in collusion. And to come up with any other conclusion is complete blindness. I leave you with this. New algorithms developed to attribute origins of genetically engineered DNA. Why is it that Bill Gates is saying that there's going to be another pandemic? Why is he saying it's going to be a different organism next time? What does Bill Gates know as he tries to play the prophet? You know that Anthony Fauci in 2015 or 2016 said that the next administration will most definitely see a worldwide pandemic. He made that statement. It's out there on YouTube and other places. You can pull it up. This is way before, 3 years before, 4 years before the pandemic, he's making a statement that the next administration is going to see the outbreak of a pandemic. Well, he knew that in 2012 that there was already a bat coronavirus that had attached to human ACE2 receptor, 99.9% of the time that research was being done by his funding under his auspices at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And what they are doing, instead of stopping the genetic engineering of viruses, genetic engineering of pathogenic viruses is what the government is doing, what these research scientists are doing. And that's why research scientists across the world are speaking out, but they are being censured, they are being persecuted, they are being eliminated from access to their own medical societies, and in many cases, they are losing their jobs, their entire career. Very highly respected research scientists, board-certified MDs, have been throwing the red flags and trying to get your attention to tell you that there is the genetic modification of infectious diseases going on at the core of this, and there are a lot of money-hungry people who are making billions of dollars from taxpayers' money, in many cases, through governments, local councils, etc. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that next time, a little bit more about that and where this pandemic is actually headed as it winds down. At this point in India, Omicron went through the entire population. They had a huge spike. It took out a bunch of people who are over 80 who had no access to health care and who were obese in many cases. And the rest of the population survived it, and now they have herd immunity, and now their cases are way down below Canada, where 90% of the people are vaccinated. You have to remember, folks, that these mRNA platform vaccines form immunity to one spike protein out of the 26 proteins that are on the surface of the virus. The S1 spike protein is all that you are immunized against. And that's the S1 spike protein from 2 years ago that has now mutated many times. So I've spoken about the Event 201, which was this planning event, this exercise that was that took place at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and the World Economic Forum and the Bill Gates Foundation funded this. All the money coming from those sources, both of those sources having an agenda that is actually written out within their own information on their own websites. I would encourage you, if you have any question about what I've shared, to go to those websites and do the research yourself and look into it and see exactly what their goals are and where they're headed with this. So that Event 201 was put in place, as I said, prior to any of the scientific information coming out about this disease. Prior to any scientific studies whatsoever on the organism or the pandemic. Shortly after that, there were a group of doctors, very highly esteemed doctors, who met together to come out with the Great Barrington Declaration. And the Great Barrington Declaration is a statement talking about how this should be handled in light of a lot of the problems that were taking place and a lot of the things that they were seeing. They were very upset with seeing the effect that the pandemic was having on society. And as epidemiologists, world-renowned epidemiologists, they were making a declaration that things should be handled differently. Let me just read you a couple of statements from the Great Barrington Declaration. As infectious disease epidemiologists and public health scientists, we have grave concerns about the damaging physical and mental health impacts of the prevailing COVID-19 policies and recommend an approach we call focused protection. Coming from both the left and the right and around the world, we have devoted our careers to protecting people. Current lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on short and long-term public health. This is leading to greater excess mortality. This will lead, to greater excess mortality in years to come, with the working class and younger members of society carrying the heaviest burden. Keeping students out of school is a grave injustice. Keeping these measures in place until there is some sort of herd immunity will cause irreparable damage, with the underprivileged disproportionately harmed. Fortunately, our understanding of the virus is growing. We know that vulnerability to death from COVID-19 is more than 1,000-fold higher in the old and infirm than in the young. Indeed, for children, COVID-19 is less dangerous than many other harms, including influenza. As immunity builds in the population, the risk of infection to all, including the vulnerable, falls. We know that all populations will eventually reach herd immunity, the point at which the rate of new infections is stable, and that this can be assisted but is not dependent upon a vaccine. So these people making this statement, they're not anti-vaxxers. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. But they were stating that to handle this pandemic, it's extremely important to be focused in the right direction, because otherwise the damage to society through the loss of business, the loss of marriages, the loss of households, the loss of mental health, and the loss of people due to suicide was going to be far greater than the potential danger to those younger individuals from the virus itself. And that has proven itself. And they're not even mentioning in this the adverse effects, which now through the 3 doctors who have blown the whistle in the arena of our armed forces, and how many different adverse effects have occurred within the armed forces, where they have a very great ability to assess and analyze the adverse effects, even better than the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So they were making this statement not being anti-vax, but saying that the way that the pandemic is being held is completely and totally false. These 3 lead doctors are some of the best renowned epidemiologists in the world, and you would think that their input would be thanked, that they would be considered in what they were saying. They said the most compassionate approach that balances the risks and benefits of reaching herd immunity is to allow those who are at minimal risk of death to live their lives normally and to build up immunity to the virus through natural infection, while better protecting those who are at the highest risk. We call this focused protection. This is the statement that I started with Bill Gates stating that Omicron is a type of vaccine getting out to the world faster and doing a better job than the vaccines. This is exactly what they were saying. They were saying that those who are young, who are not at great risk of having serious disease or hospitalization from this virus, should be allowed to get the virus and to gain natural immunity. And that those who are older and who are at risk, anyone really deemed by their physician to be at risk, should be vaccinated and isolated. Adopting measures to protect the vulnerable would be the central aim of public health responses to COVID-19. Again, adopting measures to protect the vulnerable, but allowing other people to go ahead and live their lives. Those who are not vulnerable should immediately be allowed to resume life as normal. Simple hygiene measures such as hand washing, staying home when sick, should be practiced by everyone to reduce the herd immunity threshold. Schools and universities should be open for in-person teaching. Extracurricular activities such as sports should be resumed. Young, low-risk adults should work normally rather than from home. Restaurants and other businesses should be open. Arts, music, sport, and other cultural activities should resume. People who are more at risk may participate if they wish, while society as a whole enjoys the protection conferred upon the vulnerable by those who have built up herd immunity. Now, this is exactly 2 years later, or a year and a half later, exactly what Bill Gates is admitting. These three scientists, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, professor of medicine at Harvard University, a biostatistician and an epidemiologist with expertise in detecting and monitoring infectious disease outbreaks and vaccine safety evaluations. Dr. Sunetra Gupta, professor at Oxford University, an epidemiologist with expertise in immunology, vaccine development, and mathematical modeling of infectious diseases. Again, she's a vaccine developer. She's not anti-vax. These people have talked about how this pandemic was handled, and they are absolutely right. The great damage that they predicted is exactly what has happened, and the herd immunity that they predicted would happen is exactly what Bill Gates is now admitting to. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, professor at Stanford University Medical School, a physician, epidemiologist, health economist, and public health policy expert, focusing on infectious diseases and vulnerable populations. These are the three people who wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, and they have had over 928,000, I believe right now at this point, who have signed on. These people who have signed on are some of the top epidemiologists, virologists, and vaccinologists from across the world. These are people who are not influenced by Big Pharma. They're not influenced by an HMO telling their physicians, you can treat this way, but you can't treat that way. You're not allowed to treat early. You have to wait until the patient is desaturating, turning blue, and then bring them in the hospital, put them on oxygen, and if they don't get better, put them on a ventilator and watch them die. This has been the most poorly handled medical emergency that our country has ever seen. This disease is completely and totally treatable. Even the nasty Delta variant. I quarantined myself when I was in Ukraine in September and October. I had a bad case of the Delta variant, and I treated myself for 16 days while I isolated myself in a hotel. It's completely and totally treatable. I had 25 to 75% involvement of some of my lung lobes at that time. Fortunately, I had my medications with me. These doctors have proven to be right. These signatures come from all over the world, from medical specialists, research scientists, virologists, epidemiologists, and frontline doctors from all over the world. And they were so attacked for making this statement a year and a half ago. And why were they so attacked? I've just shown in this episode today that Event 201 had set the narrative and put in place control so that nothing else could get out to the public. And that is, along with the fact that the U.S. government and our research facilities on the East Coast at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, along with the research that was done under the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, which was under the oversight of Dr. Fauci. They were doing gain-of-function research, dangerous genetic modification of already pathogenic viruses to make them more virulent. It's time, everyone, to wake up to what's been going on for over 50 years now, articles have been put in magazines about bioethics and the fact that we now have the ability to alter DNA and to play with the very structure of life itself. And if the countries of the world don't come together to deal with some of this dangerous research, we're going to have more lab leaks or even purposeful releases in the future. And that's why they are having all of these different conferences in order to rapidly develop medical countermeasures for novel infectious diseases in months instead of years, and to improve the response. And they have actual bills that are being introduced to Congress to make a law regarding how they will respond to future viral outbreaks, and specifically how they will deal with any, quote, misinformation, which again, when you plan the narrative in advance and you're not responding in accordance with the science that's coming out as they actually study the organism, the only thing you're doing is you're locking yourself into a pre-prescribed way of dealing with something that's not in connection with the reality of what's actually going on with the infectious disease, with the virus, with the pandemic. And that's exactly what has happened. So I encourage you to do some reading and do some research and to think about these things and to realize that there is dangerous scientific research that's being done on infectious diseases, in which they're even using CRISPR technology to take sections of other viruses and form new viruses called chimeras. They're taking base pairs out of this virus and putting it into this virus in order to make it something that is completely and totally unnatural and extremely dangerous. It's time for you to take a deeper look at what's going on. It's time for you to get your head out of the sand and think that the government is just taking care of you. They took care of the African American people that they infected with syphilis at Tuskegee. And if you remember back far enough, you'd have to be fairly old to remember this, but they were on television, black and white television, telling people that DDT was perfectly safe and effective. Multiple commercials promoting the use of DDT right in areas where there's drinking water runoff. We almost lost the American bald eagle as a result of DDT. And the US government was promoting its use. Big Pharma and the oil industry, the many drugs are made from a source of these organic chemicals that come from gas and oil. Plastics and everything else come from these organic chemicals. And a lot of money is made. And so it's time to be heads up and to be thinking about how to take care of your health, how to prevent infections and viruses, and to check out some of what is available other than just vaccines. I would encourage you to read up on the FLCC protocol, which is frontline doctors who have been treating this disease. There are doctors in India and South Africa who have treated as many as 6, 8, 10,000 people with only 2, 3, 4, 5 deaths out of all the people that they've treated, because they start treating it on day 2. And they have been using repurposed medications that have been shown to be effective. I might do a show on that. Thank you for listening. I hope that you have found this interesting. Again, this is Dr. Gregg Talks Story, and I encourage you to ask questions to MDs who are actually treating this disease early, get their perspective on things, and ask a lot of questions. Do some research. Don't just take what you know from the evening news. All you have to do is go to Google and start putting in some questions. All of these articles that I have been presenting are all solid references. I eliminated everything that's not a solid reference. And of course, there's always, people who don't understand things. They say there is no virus. There's, conspiracy theories in every direction. That happens when people become afraid and they don't have a medical background and they can't do, a deep dive research into medical papers. But I'm bringing this to you. I'm breaking this down for you, and I'm showing you that there is a whole lot more going on in this pandemic than just a virus and the need to vaccinate for it. Thanks again for listening. Hope you found it interesting, and please come back for another episode of Dr. Gregg Talks Story.